Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 4 of Climbing Mount CMMC. Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC. Today, we're going to be talking about data flow. If you are not familiar with what that is, you're in the right place.
You know what I think of when I think of data flow?
What?
Dune, the book.
Dune, the book. Thank you for clarifying this, not the movie.
Because the spice has to flow, right? So if you're big into that whole story plot, which I was, you gotta watch the spice, man. You gotta watch your CUI as it flows through your environment.
Wow. I only watched the movie. I'm sorry. I didn't read the book.
Yeah, the book was better.
Yeah, and I also realized that the subtitles were broken on mine, and so when they were speaking in their language, nothing appeared. And so I realized that I didn't know half of the movie because there was absolutely no context in it. That's awful. Well, actually, no context that actually has to do with data flow diagrams. Good segue. Hey, I did it. Okay, so for real, we are going to be talking about something that is definitely 100% required in your system security plan. Mm-hmm. So if you do not have one of these in there, or if you have not thought about this through your company, this is critical. This is foundational stuff. And I have talked with many contractors that aren't super familiar even with the system security plan and probably need to hear this episode. So I'm glad we're talking about it. But first, Bobby, if you want to just open the floor with what exactly is a data flow diagram and the purpose behind it in a system security plan.
Yeah, I am always a big advocate of using data flow that shows it with a more dumbed down view of your network. And not just like if you have a physical network infrastructure, I'm talking about in your, let's say you're using Microsoft 365, like show the data flow and how it might go into your tenant. Does it go into SharePoint? Does it go into Teams? Could it come out of there, go to individual workstations? Mm-hmm. Are they printing it? Is it going to physical media, those types of things? Like, that data flow should be able to show, because the simpler you can make your data flow, which it's not a simple thing a lot of times, so let's be real, it's not a simple task, but that's the challenge. Those are the cards you're dealt. The sooner that you can get the auditor to understand your data flow, the easier it is for them to move forward past that, and hopefully in a favorable way. And so that's what you really want to have, that diagram. And kind of the perfect way to test how your diagram is going, have someone that understands CMMC to a certain level, and then show them the diagram and say, tell me what you're seeing here. What do you think is happening?
Yes,
and if they're like,
agree.
It bounces off this wall here, bank shots, drops down here, and you're like, okay, well, that's not really what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is this. Mm-hmm. And then they might go, well, that's not what I got. So, and in all honesty, like sometimes it's just so complicated, you're going to have to at least explain it. But it's a good idea to try that methodology of having one or two people you trust take a look at it and see how they feel about what they're seeing. Yeah. And does it seem pretty straightforward?
Yeah. And so for CMMC level 2, that data is CUI, right? It is coming to you in a certain way because you are on a contract that is, basically you've attested to having a environment that can and is fully capable of safeguarding CUI, right? And so what you're going to be doing with this data flow diagram and this example, picture example or whatnot that you draw inside of your system security plan is exactly like what Bobby was saying, is making it comprehensive to the reader that here is where it's coming from, this is where it's sitting in the environment, and this is where it goes or it doesn't go, right? And creating and already starting to see that boundary or what needs to be secure, and so this is definitely very, very important. And just like Bobby said, it is hard to get perfect, I think, right off the bat, because there are in my opinion, many, many layers of this, like an onion. And some people are surprised by their layers, actually. They have no idea until they start researching that, this certain user is sending this data over to this side that they didn't
Right.
even know was part of it, And so it totally starts to unravel all of these new things that you didn't potentially think about when you first started it, right?
So true. And I think what you're saying is a great point. I didn't really cover it as much. Is it's really for the auditor to try to decide. It's kind of like the mystery movies where they have the outline of the body and they're like, like
Yeah.
it's sort of drawing that boundaried outline of where the system that you've built,
Hmm.
it's designed, like you were saying, to receive that CUI. And what's that outline look like? How's
Hmm.
it flowing and how's it going? Because to the auditor now, that's drawing a hard line of, if it goes outside of that boundary, that's a bad thing. It's leaving the authorization area that you've approved it to go in. It also is really a good thing that you're drawing about what you're going to have to prove,
Hmm.
that it's going to stay in there, and you have to be
So
prepared
true.
to defend
You
it.
might realize that you do not want to prove the certain part of this that is in the
Right.
boundary, right?
Right.
Yeah. That's so
Because if you
true.
drew this complex boundary, but you don't have a good way to prove it, you got a bit of a problem, because
Yeah.
a well-designed diagram does not prove, as you can see in most ads on the internet. It's like, as you can see here in this diagram, I take this pill, it goes in here and it munches on all the fat cells, and then I'm less. And you're like, wow, see, the diagram just works magically. But does that how it works in actual real physics? Maybe not. So,
No, I love how you're saying that too, because it's a great point of this is a tool for you to realize like what you're going to have to prove to an assessor, and if you are even going to be capable of like safeguarding CUI with whatever measure you are doing right now. Because I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of the people that I talk to, the way that they are safeguarding CUI is not safe and not guarded. And so they're not going to be handling their data in the same way as when they started their system security plan. And hello, that might just be the point of
yeah.
this. So maybe there is a point for having a data flow diagram, and it's because once you start making it, you start realizing, whoa, these pieces are maybe too much for us to handle, or
Right.
maybe we're not handling them correctly right
Mm-hmm.
now. So let's really break this down to, 3 or 4 parts. Okay. So I would say the first part that you have to think about is like, am I receiving, and how am I receiving this data, this
Yeah.
CUI, right? And this might sound stupid to some people. They're like, are you kidding me? Why are you even having this conversation if you don't know? I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with contractors that don't know if they're receiving this data.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, that's for real.
Sounds
That
crazy,
it's
but
it's real.
I would say 90% of the organizations we reach out to are like, so what CUI do they receive? And they're like, well, we have the 7012 requirements. I don't think we have any. And you're like, okay, well, let's talk about maybe how you receive the packages from these bids you have, and let's start thinking about how we're going to try to control the flow of this information as it's
Hmm.
coming in.
Hmm.
And how does it, who's touching it, where's it going, how you're breaking stuff out. And you just have to kind of go through that process and work with them. But what you're saying is so true, because it's process, store, or transmit,
Hmm.
right? So the way that I look at it is, are you receiving it? Then are you storing it? And are you transmitting it back out? So
Hmm.
they're really wanting to see is the inbound, where you're keeping it, and where you're sending it back out again.
Right.
And your data flow needs to be able to show that.
Right.
And the receiving portion of it, it's going to cross your boundary and it's going to come in. So you need to account for, and here's the punch in the face, is FIPS. FIPS encryption. So if someone's not really familiar with it, FIPS isn't a specific kind of encryption. It's a compliant, or actually it's a certified version of encryption that NIST has. So you basically take your module, maybe you're using, AS256 encryption, and you wrote this encryption module,
Hmm.
and you send it to NIST. They look at it, poke it, prod it, run it through all these tests and check how it's flowing. And they go, okay, it's acting like it's supposed to. It's not sending stuff off to China. The encryption, the way we expect to, is happening. This module is certified. Now it's FIPS. It's a FIPS certified module. So it's certified. It's not compliant. It has been evaluated, and they put their stamp on it. So at that point, those are the only kind of modules, and you can go to NIST's website and look up those respective modules, and the auditor's going to want to see that. So if you're saying, okay, yeah, this is FIPS compliant, they're going to say, what'd you just say? Did you say compliant? That's not good enough. They want to see the module. They want to see the receipts. So they want to see that you're receiving it. Now, if you're receiving that data from a government organization, like DoD Safe or something like that, they have those mechanisms already built in that when you go to download and pull it in, you're doing it. If you're doing it from a workstation or a system that has FIPS mode enabled, then you're grabbing it from end to end and you're using their methodology, and that would make an auditor very comfortable that you're pulling that data in a way. Right. So now it's come into your boundary, and now the story starts, right? Where does it go from there?
Yeah, so I think that is, that's really the first part to creating this data flow diagram, is just even understanding where it begins. Like, where is the starting line? Where is that first point? And then
sometimes it's not always just one place.
They might receive it. Thank you. I was going to say that next. Yeah. It could be multiple places. You've mentioned that. You said, DoD Safe, right? Which is obviously a common one, but are you receiving it from an email from your prime? Like, are you a subcontractor that's receiving emails from a prime contractor, or has a SharePoint access or something like that? Here's the onions being peeled that you're starting to see stuff happen. And in my opinion, that is just the start. Then the next part of it is, where is it going in your system? Now, this is where collaboration needs to occur, because I feel like when we start asking this question to people, they realize how little they actually know of what their users are doing in their system all the time. And so first you have to identify, right, which users have access to that CUI that's coming in, where is that going, and are they taking that? Like, do they have availability to take that? And that is scary. Those are scary layers to start peeling back, right?
Well, also a really critical thing that immediately starts flipping switches decision-wise for auditors is if we just kind of step back for just a second about the ingress points. Let's say that you're like, we have an enclave. It's great. We have virtual machines. This is good, right? So nothing's coming. It's like the Roach Motel. You pull it in and it's all awesome. And then the auditor asks the HR person, they're like, yeah, we also receive those copies via mail. And you're like, what? You're like, so you receive it by like U.S. postal mail? Like, yeah, but we also receive it digitally, so it's coming in the front door too. Okay, then. Well, if that just blew your enclave freaking out of the water.
Yeah,
you just
absolutely.
Blew it out of the water.
Yeah.
Because now
it's physical.
It just walked in the front door, literally.
Yeah.
So now you just brought your whole physical location into scope, because that's where it is. It's like nuclear waste. If it's going inside areas inside your enclave and that's the only place it stays, then if you're able to prove that it's staying there, then you can attest to that. But if it comes in the front door, if the contract requires you to work on parts that are classified as CUI and they give you specific schematics so that you can work on them appropriately, and you got to store those schematics someplace in a safe area, and those are very proprietary to the government. Those are typically technical manuals that at a minimum would be considered controlled.
Right.
And they could move higher based on the type of information that's in those manuals that you have that you're working on. So at that point, that's where that data flow is so important, is you need to start thinking about where these ingress comes, because they can start very quickly defining for you whether your physical location is going to be brought in.
That's so true. And I do think this brings up too, this isn't a data flow of what you want to happen. This is what is happening,
Right.
So you might not want it to be physical, but if you are receiving that CUI or receiving that data in that way or pulling it down in that way, it doesn't matter, like
Mm-hmm.
you have to identify it here. Because
And
if you get this wrong, but the assessor in your level 2 certification or level 2 assessment comes in to ask you this in phase 1 and you get it wrong and you're not prepared
mm-hmm.
for that new scope to occur, it is a very bad day.
Right.
Very bad day.
And I would suggest, in my opinion, having really kind of two data flows if you have this scenario play out. The data flow for physical CUI in your environment, because trying to overlap the physical to digital can be a little more complicated because you're just going to get that diagram really, really big.
Great
Chances are.
point. Yeah.
Sometimes you sort of need to blend the two together. And you can have like the digital version, the overarching big one that shows it all, but it's zoomed way out, and then you can look at the actual physical aspect of it. It could be we receive it from DoD Safe, we download it into our CUI based workstations, we then upload it to the SharePoint, and then we print it from this printer, and then it goes into a package for us to do some type of manufacturing or development process, and
Right.
it might move around on the shop room floor. So maybe you say you print it and then see this diagram to see how it might move around on the floor. And as that thing's moving around, if you're thinking, oh, well, we'll just keep it CUI's in this safe area here, but if you're like toting it around the whole building, it's going to be very difficult to try to keep your building at a smaller scope scale
Yeah.
as they're walking around, because you got to think about who has access to that environment. And it starts to get really complicated when you start trying to think about how do you want to split a building that is part of it is going to be in scope and you want to keep part of it out. How could you do that so that you could keep these users out of scope so they don't get pulled into the cost of having that all. But if you don't have a mechanism to control how it's physically flowing around the building, it gets really difficult. And that's where you have to start making some decisions. Do you want to change some of your business processes? Maybe you don't print that, and maybe it doesn't go in a package and move around as it's being in the milling system and this, and then come here, and then you do the testing and other pieces. Maybe you do that. Now, pro tip 2, there's a bit of a debate around when it's technical data and when it's been manufactured, whether it's really CUI, right? So let's say that...
You're telling me these things aren't clearly defined?
Right. So let's say this little tinker thing that I have is the design for it is technical, right? The measurements of it, the depths, how you have it, maybe the details of the material that you want to do, all of this in this technical design, and it's controlled, very controlled. But when you make it, like just me holding it, am I able to actually manufacture this back to the exact same specifics? A solid argument could be no, you couldn't. Unless I have a caliper and I'm like, weighing it on a scale, like just looking at it and holding it in its entirety, does this constitute CUI once I've manufactured it? A case could be made that it's not, right? The technical manual that shows you how to make it and manufacture it, that could be, but when it's made, that's what attorneys are for, right? You need to get with a qualified attorney that will stand behind your decision about how this is. Maybe it might be, maybe it might not be. Maybe you can prove that after it's made and manufactured that it's not controlled unclassified information at that point, because the way that this system is and the way it works, it isn't. It isn't immediately because it was controlled in the design. Does it mean that the product when it's manufactured is immediately CUI? That's where having someone that understands that, make that decision. It's great if it's an attorney because you have client attorney privileges and other types of things that you can stand by. And if the auditor starts pushing back on some of how you're handling your boundary protection, if you have those types of conversations, and then you say, well, our attorney looked at this, they've made the decision, this is what it is, or you disagreeing with our attorney. That's, the auditor's like, what? You're like, yeah, somebody who's like, that's what they do for a living, looked at this and said, when it's been made, that doesn't fall there. They have a whole argument about why that is. And to be frank, like the auditor's job is not really to be making rulings about CUI. Their job is to really be classifying whether the environment that you have is capable of handling the CUI, not really making necessarily judgment calls around those types of things.
Mm-hmm.
If you start getting into those types of baits, it starts to get a little like, why is the auditor getting into the decision making about
Why
what
are
is
they
and isn't
talking to me
CUI?
about this? Yeah.
Yeah, why are they talking to me about that? But where it tends to happen is when the auditor starts following the flow and they say, well, it got made, it got manufactured. Why aren't you protecting the physical facility what does that? Because they would start thinking about, did it all of a sudden magically not become CUI? And they might ask that question. It's a logical question to ask as an auditor.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to be prepared to ask
To
that. But
answer
how
it.
far the auditor wants to go around that topic, they might start pushing the boundaries. So just be prepared.
Yeah, I think you bring up such a great point of when defining, where the CUI is going and the different pieces to this data flow diagram. You have to really be prepared to answer questions about like what type of asset, it is and what it's classified as. And your assessor going through phase one with you and looking at this is going to be understanding this and trying to define it. This is not for the faint of heart. Like
Right.
you have to know these things to be able to answer questions, or they're just going to say to you, actually, I would just classify that user and their workstation fully a CUI asset. And if you don't know what that means, you could just say, okay, sounds good. And then they keep moving on. But what you just did is open Pandora's box. But because
Right.
you don't really know what that means to classify something as a CUI asset, versus a CRMA or whatnot, you don't know when to not necessarily argue, but speak up about how you would classify it in your system, and this is why, to an assessor.
Yeah, for sure.
I definitely think that's a very important part to get right and try to
Yeah.
try to
The
classify.
scoping and asset categorization has a big impact on how you're able to prove the protection of CUI as that data flow moves.
Mm-hmm.
What you just said is so true, Kaleigh, because you might just do something to make an auditor very happy in phase one so you can move past phase one. But the way that you wrote your SSP to prove that the asset categorizations are accurate and that you can validate they're being protected, moving something just to a CMRA, which you thought was going to be out of scope, could be hugely detrimental because the auditor looks at that and goes, okay, well, but do you have at least some of the controls addressed here? And then you're like, it could just throw you in a whole tailspin.
Yeah.
Just something very simple that
Absolutely.
might seem innocuous. Like, yeah, that's so true.
Yeah. So another thing that I want to talk about, two other things, is data at rest. Would you describe to somebody that's not very familiar with CMMC terms in this scenario what that means?
Yeah. So when it goes to the process and store means the data at rest. And so things could, this is one of the things where people really pop Prevail pretty hard. It's a tool that you can use to over the counter, very like a software specifically designed to handle CUI. And this is where some people got really wrapped around the axle around utilizing that product because it has encryption and decryption coming. But once it hits the workstation and it falls onto the machine and you download it from that product, and it doesn't even really have to be Prevail. It could be like maybe you have Box, or maybe you're using OneDrive or something, and it's all encrypted in REST in those, and then you download it to a workstation on your box, and that box isn't encrypted, and it doesn't have the necessary FIPS applied to it. You just broke that chain because it now left at rest. The exception to that is if it comes into your environment and you're using alternative protection, like physical protections to protect it. So in other words, when it came into your building, it was encrypted. And once it's inside the four walls, you're leaning on the physical protection, the door controls, the permissions, the security guard with a bazooka, whatever, that's going to protect that data.
Yeah.
But once it starts to leave that boundary, the FIPS has to get kicked back in again. Well, spoiler alert, Rev 3, they took that away. Like, they want to see encryption from start to finish. So just kind of...
Just to make sure you know what's coming.
Yeah, just know that's leaving. So
Yeah.
you might as well just go ahead and start trying to figure out how to keep the thing fully encrypted through the whole process.
Yeah. Yeah. So
And that goes for cloud storage as well. You
yes.
got to pay attention
Okay,
to
that's
that.
what I was going to say. Yeah. Cloud storage does not apply in the same way, right, as physical. Okay. So you're,
And using now, one of the things you can do is inherit from the FedRAMP. Like if you're using the FedRAMP, and you can start to leverage their FedRAMP package that they
authorization
have,
package.
authorization for you to be able to say, okay, well, we're perhaps the data stays in there, right? So you're going to leverage their natural encryption that you're using. So would you stand up a workstation using their FedRAMP based enterprise workstation and then turn on BitLocker on top of it and re-encrypt the hard drive that's already server-side encrypted on Azure side? I would say no. Maybe your auditor might say yes, right? You don't, so you got to really think about that. A good case, because it's a FedRAMP environment and it stays in there, that you shouldn't have to. So those are things that, we're going to talk about in another podcast. Like when you start putting in those numbers, you want to see the same return for that. But what ends up happening is 4 or 5 different auditors look at different things and they come back with a different number, a different result of their opinion about whether it's met or not met. That's super dangerous.
Very dangerous. Yes. The last thing I want to talk about here is, and you brought up this point, Bobby, and I think it's an excellent point, is sanitization. So the end of the road for the CUI and the data, because this is a scary thing, but you can't just leave laptops, you can't just leave phones, can't just leave this stuff laying around if potentially this stuff is on it, right? Because that can become very, very bad stuff. So what do you do even when you're not using that device? You're done using that device, or you're done using that printer, or you're done using that manufacturing equipment or whatnot, right? So do you want to explain to people like what sanitization really is of CUI and how you should handle that in your environment?
Yeah, that's a good one. It's a one that you can get screwed up on so bad.
Yeah.
You're like, oh man, we're tracking it when it comes in. We're tracking it when it leaves. It goes through. We've got FIPS mode turned on all of our machines. The toilets have FIPS encryption turned on. You're like, wow, okay, that's amazing. You're good to go. But then when someone's done with the laptop, you just throw it in the corner and then you call that company and they come take the laptop out and you're good. And the auditor's going to pop you on that. They're going to look at that and go, okay, well, how are you handling the physical assets that you have 20 laptops and you're going to rotate them, right? At some point. Yeah. We got this. So do you have a procedure for that? Yes, we do. We have a good procedure. Okay, cool. Let me see that procedure for how you sanitize them before you retire them. We do. They're like, okay, that's cool, but I need to see the receipts. Show me how you're doing it. Give me the example. I need you to help me get there. Prove to me that you're doing it. And just telling me you do it is not enough. You've got to show me that you have it. Give me a procedure that walks me through and understanding who you're going to pick, or at least a policy that defines that it's going to be a GSA approved style destruction methodology, right? That they're going to pull up a truck and that truck is going to have this beautiful muncher machine that you've just, as a child, always wanted to watch. And you just watch the hard drive drop in there and it goes, and just chews it up. And you're like, yes, I love this. Would it be cool for me to shoot it with a gun and, do other types of methods? It's cool, but it's not GSA. They have all those criterias like the type of shredder.
So you're telling me you can't run over that printer with your car like you used to do back in the day?
That doesn't cut it, literally.
No, really.
So they want to see that you have a procedure and a process around that.
Yeah.
And so, pro tip, you've got to sit down, take a whiteboard, and think about how the data comes in, how it sits at rest. Once that components touch it, all right. So track with me. Okay, so let's say it goes to a printer. Does that printer have a hard drive? Whoa, what did you just say? Yeah, does that printer have a hard drive? The answer is yes. Okay, you need to know that, because that sucker might literally have print jobs of CUI on it, and the auditor might catch you on that. So you want to think about it. Okay, so it hits this printer, it hits this special plotter. Okay, it goes over to this specialized asset that does CNC machines. Okay, yes, it's a specialized asset, so it doesn't have all the things applied to it, but there's still CUI on it. So maybe the manufacturer comes in, they grab the hard drive for that specialized asset, and they walk out the door and put a new image system. You might say, no, you ain't. Sorry, you can't do that. I need to take that. Well, it's going to be $800 for that hard drive that I guess I'm paying $800 because that sucker's got to get destroyed in the right way. Or you're going to have to do a special overwrite for it, whatever, but you're going to have to account for those types of activities with those types of equipment. And just know, just because the auditor might not have caught it doesn't mean that you couldn't be held liable for it. So you need to really start to think about that data flow and track it like it's, I saw some example where they did a thing where they squirted like special chemical on your hands, and then they pretended like they were eating and they touched a whole bunch of different things. And then after the meal, they turned like a black light on. You were like, holy crap, like that stuff got everywhere. Like you just don't realize how much when you're touching stuff, where it gets, it's super gross, right?
I don't even want to know what my 2-year-old has done to my home.
It's all like all over you, all over the, whatever. But that's kind of how CUI is too. You've got to think of it that way and track how it's flowing around your environment so that you can account for it. And the best way to do it is just sit down and treat it like it's like a stain that is just moving around, and like, what is it leaving that mark on, so that you can then track and make sure that you're appropriately sanitizing it in every area that it's touching.
So true.
Because auditors are so freaking great at catching you from the different perspectives. You're not thinking about that. And so you really got to be able to be ready to speak to it.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I really do think, ending with that, I hope gives you guys opens your eyes to this discussion that is so needed inside of every organization that's preparing for CMMC. Spoiler alert, it is coming. It's actually already here, but to some people it's still on its way, Right. So no matter what you want to say, I guess, but it's here, and you really need to start having these discussions, because look at what it's opening up. And we're just giving just small examples in this 30 minutes, but every organization is different, and some of them are way more complicated. Some of them are more simple. Some of them are a lot. You're thinking about different locations. You're thinking about different, we didn't even talk about, what about if people are coming and going from the office and bringing their computers? What happens with all these different layers? We didn't even talk about, bring your own device. We didn't talk about mobile phones and what that brings to the table. All of these things that you start to identify that this stain, like what Bobby was talking about, this radioactive material we call CUI, is touching in all of these places. So I really hope that this is helpful for you guys who are starting this journey or trying to figure out how to make their data flow diagram. I hope this just brings to light how you can do that and just really absorb and try to write down as much as you can to make sure that you're creating that right scope, and starting off with a good foundation. If you guys have any questions specifically about this, please feel free to put in the comments. We'll answer any of those comments that we get. Also make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and whatnot and stay up to date on what we're posting there. We're always trying to post new updates and new things for you guys there too. And tune in also for next Thursday for another very spicy, exciting episode where we dive more into calculators and calculators. So I'm excited for that one. Yeah. So thank you guys again for listening. And remember, as always, to keep on climbing. See ya. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.